All right, let's dive into one of the biggest ideas out there, one that really shapes the world we live in: individualism. So let's kick things off with a little thought experiment, something you can probably relate to. Okay, picture this. It's lunchtime. You are starving. Maybe you skipped breakfast, and all you can think about is that juicy cheeseburger from the cafeteria. But you get there, and surprise, the whole menu's been replaced. Someone decided that for the greater good, everyone's eating healthy now. Your choice? Poof, gone. And that right there raises a massive question. When does what's good for the group get to cancel out your personal freedom to choose? Well, that tension, that's what individualism is all about. An ideology is just a big word for a set of beliefs. And this one puts the individual person front and center. It's all about valuing your freedom, your independence, and your ability to stand on your own 2 feet. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. We'll look at that your choice versus their rules idea, see where individualism came from, how it affects politics and money, and the big debates it causes today. And then we'll wrap it all up. So first up, where did this whole idea even come from? Believe it or not, focusing on you as a unique person is a pretty recent thing in the grand sweep of human history. Think about it. For hundreds and hundreds of years, back in the Middle Ages, who you were was all about what group you belonged to. You weren't just John or Jane. You were a peasant or a noble or a member of the clergy. Your personal identity kind of took a back seat. But then, a huge change started to happen during the Renaissance and really picked up speed in the Enlightenment. People started thinking, hey, wait a minute. Individuals can think for themselves. We can use reason to figure things out. And you can literally see this shift in the art. Over on the left, you've got typical art from the Middle Ages. It's very focused on religious figures, not super realistic. But then, boom, look at the right. That's Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. All of a sudden, the star of the show is the human being. The focus is on the human body, its proportions, its potential. Art started celebrating the individual big time. Okay, so this new way of thinking wasn't just about art. It was explosive. It sparked actual revolutions and created a brand new way to run a country, a liberal democracy, where the whole point is to protect the freedom of the individual. So how do you make that work? A super important piece of the puzzle is something called the rule of law. And this is a big one. It basically means that the law is king. Not a person, not a monarch, not a president. The law has the final say. It's like in a hockey game, right? The rules apply to everyone, even the star player. No one is above the law. And one of the first major steps toward this was way back in 1215 with the Magna Carta. You can see it here. King John of England is literally being forced by his own nobles to sign a document. And that document pretty much said, listen, pal, you might be the king, but there are rules you have to follow too. It was a huge deal because it put a check on his power. Winston Churchill summed it up perfectly. He said, the Magna Carta created a law which is above the king. Just think about that for a second. Absolutely revolutionary. And that idea became the foundation for democracies all over the world. From there, you get this idea of a social contract. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. We all kind of agree to give up some of our total wild freedom, like the freedom to just drive wherever we want on the road. And in return, we get to live in a safe, organized society with traffic lights and laws. It's the basic bargain we all make to live together without chaos. And today, that bargain shows up as your individual rights and freedoms. The right to vote, to say what you think, to practice your religion. These are the things that protect you, the individual. They're written down in super important documents like Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms to make sure no government can just decide to take them away. All right, so we've seen how individualism changed politics, but what about money? Let's talk about how this idea completely flipped the script on the economy. Okay, so back in the day, the big economic system was something called mercantilism. The government controlled everything, like everything, and the goal was basically just to pile up as much gold as possible. But then this guy, Adam Smith, comes along with a radical new idea, the free market. He said, what if the government just got out of the way? This hands-off idea is called Laissez-Faire. He argued that if everyone just chased their own goals, it would actually make everyone better off. And his whole system is built on these 4 key pillars. You've got economic freedom, you get to pick your job and what you buy. Self-interest, the idea that you doing what's best for you helps the whole system. Competition, which forces companies to give us better stuff for less money. And private property, the simple idea that you can own things. These are the building blocks for the economies many of us live in today. Which brings us right back to where we started, the cheeseburger. Because that same conflict, your individual choice versus the rules of the group, is something we deal with all the time, in much bigger ways. It's this constant debate. Where do we draw the line between my freedom and what's good for everyone else? And this is where it gets really complicated, right? When does one person's freedom start to step on someone else's right to be safe or to be treated fairly? It's a tough question, and it's at the heart of so many of our biggest social debates. A really powerful example of this clash is the debate over the death penalty. From an individualist perspective, you'd argue that every single person has a right to life, no matter what. Plus, what if the courts get it wrong? You can't undo that. But from a more collectivist point of view, the argument is that the safety of the whole society is more important than one criminal's life. You can see how these two worldviews are in a total head-to-head conflict here. All right, we've covered a lot of ground, so let's boil it all down to the key things you need to remember. First, individualism is the belief that the individual person is super important and should be free. Second, remember that this idea grew out of the Renaissance and Enlightenment, shifting the focus from the group to the single person. Third, in politics, this led to things like the rule of law and individual rights. Fourth, in economics, it gave us free markets. And finally, it's the reason we're always debating that tricky balance between one person's freedom and the well-being of the whole community. Okay, to wrap this all up, I'll leave you with a couple of questions to think about. First, how did that shift we saw in Renaissance art really show this new value of individualism? And second, what's the real, fundamental difference between having a rule of law versus just having the rule of a king? Thanks for tuning in.